From Snap and Retreat to the Patch of the Week, Marvel Snap players are passionate about a lot of things, but one thing they're more passionate about than anything else is yelling at people on the internet. This is Marvel Snap Hot Takes. Nerfing or reworking cards because they feel bad or are annoying to play against, even if it's not actually that strong, is a legit reason to do so. Most people open the games to have fun, not to say, yeah, I didn't enjoy the games, but I won anyway. I think this is baseline a take that sounds good, but in practice is very hard to individualize because different people enjoy different things. So there are some things you can generalize and say, I think most people don't enjoy this. You can generalize and say, like, mill, for example, is a thing more people dislike than some other things. But generally, a lot of things are going to appeal to different segments of the population. To use the Magic player psychographic terms, some people will like to do big combos, some people will like to play straightforward big decks, and some people really do care only about winning. So whether or not you're one of those people, and there are plenty of others as well, maybe you're a fan of certain characters, it's very easy to look at any metagame and be a person who thinks it's not fun, because there isn't really an objective measure of fun. There's just kind of guesswork. And I think largely they have an ethos of balancing that points them toward they think that their player base does not like people messing with their stuff. They don't like it when they get clogged. They don't like it when they get milled. It's not necessarily related to how good those things are, just whether it's happening to them. And I think that is something I agree with, but it's also something that's hard to say is an objective fact. Another thing that I think they think about their player base is their player base would rather be executing a game plan and would like to build a ship and run it up against their opponent's ship to see who does points better, to play a more traditional game of Marvel Snap. Now, this is something I think is writ large probably true, but do people like games being a little more predetermined? Because a lot of the time when it's sort of ship-on-ship combat, one of those ships is going to be better equipped for it. It's actually a little more rare to have closer games when neither player is interacting meaningfully. So that's going to push a certain type of player away from the game. Largely, I think that it's easy to say something like this, but you're gonna have to be specific about what it is that is fun and not fun, because it is hard to be objective about those things. A lot of the time, whenever something is meta, people call it not fun or cringe because they see it a lot. One of the biggest things that impacts whether or not people think something isn't fun is it happening to them a bunch. And so that is the kind of thing that you do have to worry about when you make judgments like this. How much of it is they're just seeing a lot of it? How much of it is bad luck? A lot of people are going to think losing isn't fun. No one is out here thinking, I want to lose. And Marvel Snap, because of the way retreating works, there's going to be plenty of games that are losses that'll make you feel bad if you don't think about them the right way. And I think that this is largely the point I'm driving at. It's very easy to call anything popular not fun. I think it's a little bit harder to actually make the case for that being true absent them being good. Largely, I don't think people queue up in a game to lose. They queue up in a game to win. When they win, they will be having more fun. So how do you take that factor out of judging what is and isn't a fun play style? I think that's difficult, and I think they do a pretty okay job of at least nailing down some of the more obvious offenders, Clog and Mill and things of that nature. Speaking of which, I think it's baffling that Clog can't exist, but things like Negative and New Gambit are allowed to exist. At least Clog had counterplay that wasn't just either run specific tech to deal with them, or pray they didn't draw their key cards. I mean, there is like a pretty notable difference between Clog and Negative and Gambit, right? The Negative decks and the Gambit decks are asking you to build towards a like aspirational thing, right? I am going to build towards this deck building requirement, whereas a Clog deck was pretty much always put every card that said Clog in a deck and then you win on critical mass. I do think there is a pretty clear difference between something like Mr. Negative, which is a pretty boring one-note play style, but is still a thing that is building a ship, versus Clog, which is purely sabotaging your opponent's ship. And that is a meaningful distinction when we talk about these cards. I think that largely it's important to recognize that. Gambit is a card that I am surprised they made as strong as it is, because I do think it kind of verges on a space in design that I don't think they necessarily wanted to touch as much as they have with Gambit. That is a tech card kind of card. That's a Shang-Chi. That's a Killmonger. They have typically taken power away from cards like that over the last 6 to 8 months. They've been like, we don't want those to be everywhere. So now there's one that is quite good, and it's not a coincidence that the one they felt safe investing power in is the one that has a deck building hook on the card. That's probably why. I would suspect that this card having a deck building hook, a requirement on top of it, means that it's a lot safer to do as a tech card because it just simply can't go everywhere and ruin everyone's games. And I think that that is a pretty big argument for why it's a little more okay to do Gambit than it is to do Clog. Clog specifically is one of the few outliers that I think a large portion of the community can agree is largely unpleasant. And one of the things that I've learned from these sort of Star-Lord debate / debacle is that if the play arounds to it are really only available to good players, like Melee Waluigi, the person saying this, that's a good player. That's like a top 1,000 player. The play arounds might be obvious to you. You know, the way in which you have to like work around filling up lanes early. But if the play arounds are really only obvious to people closer to the top of the ladder, they functionally don't exist. And this is the same thing that I ran into when I was saying Star-Lord was like a fine thing to exist, because I was beating the crap out of it. But those play around lines don't functionally exist for the majority of people who play this game. They are asking too much in terms of interaction and like paying attention. And this is a game people play on the toilet. And frankly, it's just kind of a lot to ask when is to like make sure you are on top of it, make sure you are playing you make sure you're doing things that are really unintuitive. Like filling up your lanes on turn 4 so they can't do it for you. Oh, and if you guess wrong and you filled up your lanes on turn 4 for no reason, that's also going to lose you the game. But if you guessed right, you beat them. Like, that just doesn't seem like a play pattern that is something they should be promoting to me. Community ideas are bad, especially monetization-wise. Tell them what you feel about stuff and not how they should do stuff. I think this is a little harsh. I've seen some good community ideas. I think that largely it's like directionally true, which is to say players are a lot better at telling you what the problem is and a lot worse at actually solving the problem. And that's because players have full information about what's making them feel bad. Like, yeah, maybe someone's lying to themselves, but they're pretty sure that they believe what they're saying, right? Generally speaking, when you are having a bad feeling, you kind of know why that is. You can identify a pain point a lot better than someone who may be, contextless the way I am, right? Like we talk about the Star-Lord thing, right? A lot of players identified the pain point of, hey man, that's not really like a valid play around. You're asking too much. And that's something that I would have missed, right? And so I think that kind of thing is going to be valuable feedback. What's not necessarily valuable feedback is the correct thing to do about it. And you see a lot of these pitches with Star-Lord where it's like, what I would do about Star-Lord is kill him. And that's because you don't have the business interest in the game that the company does. The company has a business interest in not rug pulling people. They don't want to do that because that's really bad for them if people don't feel like they can believe that the cards they're buying are going to stay the same way. People complain about that with this game all the time. They also have a vested interest in doing things that don't drive away the player base. You'd think that they do at the very least. Like, they also know better than we do where they make their money. So understanding how to fix something kind of requires those inputs. Like if you want to have a legitimate pitch of what they should do about something, you kind of need to be someone who has knowledge of more of the context, right? I don't know how much of a context the problem itself is. I would say maybe it's like a third to a half of the context, and the rest of the context is like, what happened last time we did this? What did it do to our player base numbers? What is the closest analogy to doing this? What is the monetization that we expect to win or lose by making a decision like this? What about player sentiment? How can we reasonably gauge that? We have a bunch of metrics that we look at for things like this. Without access to any of those, it's a lot harder for like people to do like armchair dev work, I think. And that means that they are taking a thing they are maybe 100% right about, which is their own experience of what the pain point is. And then they're introducing a bunch of places where they can be wrong, which is like all this other context you need to know in order to actually make the right decision about that pain point. So like, yes, I do think that largely your player base writ large is going to be better at identifying what the problem is and worse at telling you how to fix it. But that's because they just simply can't have access to the information that informs those decisions. It's not like they're fundamentally incapable of it. There's just a lack of like actual proprietary knowledge. The team clash mechanic would be great if balanced and added to the main game. More lore team synergies would be great and make more cards meta. I think that this is largely a good take, actually. One of the things that Magic has going for it is the color pie. Something Hearthstone has going for it is classes. And that allows them to make more cards without having to worry about the generic applicability of those cards. Like one thing you run into in recent Marvel Snap is how many decks are focused on duplicating things, right? What if the Grand Master just simply wasn't in the class that Star-Lord was in? It's just a much easier environment to balance. The problem, I think, with doing it would largely be that Marvel Snap doesn't have or make enough cards to support this. That would necessitate a very different business model from the one that they have. And I do think, as much as I would like to see that actually be a kind of real solution, I don't know that Marvel Snap is equipped to deliver on what you're asking for outside of these limited time events. Snapping and retreating are not broken. The only folks that have a problem with it are salty content creators who can't punish rubes for their YouTube shorts anymore. Well, as someone who probably hasn't made a YouTube short in like a year, I'm hoping you're not talking about me. But I do think that there is something to the idea that it does make it harder to make content. I guess the other thing, though, is, to me, outside of being a content creator, just looking at the game, a lot of the fun of the game is the simultaneous turn build-up to that final turn. I don't know exactly how much of the fun I would say is located on turn 6 as opposed to on turns 1 through 5. But if you ask me to ballpark it, I would say about half the fun of the game is located on turn 6. That's the fun part. That's the cream. That's the climax. That's the cherry on top of the rest of the game. And I think that retreating, in as much as it is a mechanic that makes that happen less, is a problem. Not like a problem that I have a solution for. I got nothing. I have no idea how to make it better. Like I'm not going to sit here and act like this is one of those things where it's like, in as much as I can identify a problem, it is that retreating probably makes turn 6 happen less than I would like. If I were to like design this game from scratch, I'd be like, I want people to go to turn 6. That's where the fun is. I want the players to do the thing that's the fun. They build their deck to be a turn 6 deck. Like, so every deck in this game is built to be a cool turn 6. That's what it's there for, right? And so not being able to do that kind of takes away a lot of the fun of the deck. I do think that is an actual legitimate flaw in how Marvel Snap is designed. I don't think you can solve it in a good way, but I do think it is worth recognizing that, like, hey, a lot of the fun and a lot of the deck building is aimed at turn 6, and the less it happens, the less players are accessing all of the fun of the game. And that's a real thing. The appeal of limited time game modes often lies in their exclusivity. By diminishing their scarcity, the sense of anticipation and excitement that usually accompanies such events is lost, ultimately reducing the enjoyment and becoming a twice-a-month chore. I think that this might be a little bit more revealing of the person asking it than anything else, because I think how you feel about this stuff, oh, it's a chore, I have to do it. Like, that's kind of the mindset I don't think you should approach any mobile game with. And this is coming from someone who has approached many mobile games with that mindset. When you feel like you have to do something, that's sort of the road to hell. You know, you have to do this. You don't. You don't have to do this. I don't think that's an issue of like these limited time game modes becoming less exclusive or more scheduled. I think you just don't like chores. And you're right not to like chores. But you don't have to do them. Like, that's the key thing. You can just be like, I'm good. This card is bad. I do not care. And I think that that is a valid thing to do. You're allowed to make that decision. And that is a reasonable decision that you can make, and you can say, I think this is not something I want to be doing. You're allowed to do that. And I feel like a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people need permission to do that. And it's like, because then they'll turn around and be like, I'm being punished for not choosing. No, you have to go into it clear-eyed, right? I am choosing not to engage with this because it will not make things more fun. I don't engage with alliances. They don't make my things more fun. And yes, if I engage with alliances, I would have a lot more premium mystery variants. I am choosing to give up on that. I am making that choice. And it's the kind of choice you're going to have to make. I am not willing to engage in that way with LTGMs. I pay that 800 gold tax basically every time because I don't want to do my chores, and they gave me a button that says pay $10 to not do your chores, and I am a sheep. But I'm clear-eyed about this, and I just think it's important to be that way. Card acquisition is perfectly fine for current and active players. There's no need to use packs and risk pulling a Kraglin when you can spend 1k more tokens and get Gambit or Maverick for sure. We have enough resources monthly with Season Pass, pretty important parenthetical there, to get the good cards. The problem is that the on-ramp for new and returning players is slow, expensive, and lacks agency. Asking new or returning players to fork over a lot of money to catch up makes no sense when the meta evolves this fast. The OTA and release schedule makes it silly for them. I think that's all basically true. Let's go point by point. The first is the Season Pass bit. If you get the Season Pass, you can pretty much, like, you get the Season Pass over time. One thing I think a lot of players really need to know about is the free 100 credits in the web shop every day. That adds up. 3,000 free credits over the course of the month. That's a pretty big boost. So between the Season Pass, that, your daily missions, you will probably be able to get most of the cards you want if you are someone who already has a decent amount of the cards. You will have a much bigger problem if you are a newer player. And I think that that is a real problem that Marvel Snap has. There aren't enough on-ramps into the game. The actual game Marvel Snap that we all play starts like 10,000 CL in. And you just spend the first 10,000 CL of your experience playing in the kiddie pool, and there's no real way for you to meaningfully do something because let's say you go get the best deck in the game and then they nerf it. Seems bad. That's an extremely real problem, and probably Marvel Snap's biggest, but there is a part of me that wonders if maybe it's sort of too late to fix. Like, that's the kind of thing they're supposed to fix when this game is still popping, you know? That's the kind of thing they're supposed to fix when everyone is new. And now it's honestly the kind of thing where it's like, I wonder if there's probably some guy whose job it is to look at like the ROI on this stuff, and they're like, look, man, there's not enough new players to justify doing this, so why are we going to do it? Like, that kind of thing seems a lot more possible now. Like, I don't want to act like the time for it to happen is gone, because obviously it's better to do it. But I do think that this is the kind of thing that if they had done it a year and a half, 2 years ago, the game would have been in a much better spot. And again, I don't want to be like Marvel Snap's in a bad spot. It's pretty clearly like downward trending, I would say. But it's downward trending with like a fairly stable player base and like a bunch of people who are really devoted to the game. And I think in the context of other games in the mobile space or in the card game space, it's very difficult for me to call this anything other than an unmitigated success. What I'm saying here is it probably could have been bigger. This is a game that probably could have been bigger. And if there is a way to like onboard a bunch of new players, they talk about draft mode all the time, right? They're like, oh, we're going to do draft mode. We're going to do draft mode. You need to have that on-ramp built in before you do that. Because if you get a bunch of people coming in for draft mode and then they experience the current relative lack of an on-ramp from draft mode into like the rest of the game, that could be a serious problem. It could make building draft mode as a user acquisition tool a lot less effective. Retreating against matchups or locations you don't like makes the game much more pleasant, but it isn't ethical because it doesn't scale. Now, I do think that on a baseline level, doing things that bring you enjoyment is a good way of making sure that you enjoy what you're doing rather than just doing chores, right? And I think a lot of people object to the snap and retreat mechanic of Marvel Snap because they don't want to engage in it in the way that the game is telling them to engage in it, which is to say, retreating feels like losing, and until you get to the point where you at least feel like a smart retreat is not as big of a loss as it could be, then maybe you aren't going to be making the correct decisions around snapping and retreating. A lot of the time it's difficult because humans are typically pretty risk averse, they're loss averse, so it's hard to make the correct mathematical decisions about when you're favored, you should snap, when your opponent is favored by a certain amount and they snap, you should respect that and retreat. Understanding those things and getting rid of the part of yourself that is scared of them is good. But at the same time, as someone who advocates so heavily for opting out of many of the chores Marvel Snap gives you, I don't think it's wrong to look at ranked as another piece of those chores. I don't think it's incorrect to think, well, sometimes ranking up is not something that I want to be caring about right now. The only time I think you run into that problem is when you expect it to also come with ranking up. As long as you're going into this clear-eyed and saying, I'm willing to take these L's in order to have a better time, and I will actually have a better time for doing it, then I think it's a very reasonable thing to do, even at scale. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'm KMBest. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. There are a couple of messages I really want to get to right now, though. The first is, we will be doing the next one of these videos, the hot takes videos, in the official Marvel Snap Discord. Now, what we're going to do is set up a forum for it. By the time this video goes live, you should be able to see it in the official Marvel Snap Discord. Huge shout out to the mods for coordinating this with me. The way it's going to work is there's going to be an upvote, downvote system for each of the takes, but there's also going to be a hot or cold system. I know I can't force people to upvote and downvote based on whether or not they think it's a good take or not. People are going to use it as a disagree button. So what I'm interested to see is people voting on not just which takes they agree with, that's the up or down, but also on how hot of a take they think the take is. This forum, I believe, is planned to be open for a week, and the next video will be using takes pulled exclusively from there. So if you are someone who's been like, I need to know when you're going to do takes, I miss your Twitter posts, or I don't want to get on Twitter for a variety of probably very reasonable ethical reasons, this is your chance. That said, I also want to say that I am currently on a new PC. So I have downloaded all my settings, I've done all this stuff. I don't know how this video is going to actually turn out. If you notice something, hey man, your audio's messed up, something sounds off, something looks off, let me know, because I have very bad ears. So there's a very real chance that I might not have noticed. Tell me what it is. Sometimes I'll get people being like, the audio's messed up. I don't know how it's messed up. You have to tell me how it's messed up. So with all of that said, thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.